Thank you all for being here. Wanted to start off the panel with a question to all of our panelists, whoever wants to jump in first. You all represent or work in very fast-growing areas of Texas. You have the state legislature providing less money for transportation than many people say is needed. Federal funding seems to never be very reliable, Exhibit A this week. How has that impacted how you get things done at the local level?
It makes it difficult because the state's not doing its core responsibility of adequately funding transportation. Executive Director Phil Wilson said that we needed $4 billion, I believe it was in this biennium, and if we pass a constitutional proposition next year, we may get half of that. But it's not nearly enough. We're planning currently, I think, we're planning to spend $97.5 million between now and 2035 on that plan. In order to fully fund that plan, we need an additional $400 billion. So it makes for having to be innovative, and we're going to have to keep working with Austin and Washington to do their part.
I think it's obviously a challenge and an opportunity, and I know that the North Texas region has been very successful in the last 5 to 10 years in bringing numerous major projects to the front. We've got at this point, I believe, somewhere in the vicinity of $16 billion worth of projects that are either almost finished and are going on at any one time, and it makes what I would call partnerships more and more important. Working together, working with the private sector through the, I guess we call them the CDA projects that are going on. There was discussion on tolling here earlier. Well, there's all kinds of tolling. You know, you have NTTA, which has tolling. You have TxDOT, which has projects in my area that they own that are going to be tolled, the DFW connector. And then we have CDA projects where we involve a private sector entity who has a 52-year concession. So, but that partnership of working together, I think one of another key area that has been very important is to have a job that's ready to go. Have something that's, if you've got the project, you've got your engineering and environmental, you don't have your funding for the actual construction, just hang on, because it will, somehow, some way, dollars will appear, and when they appear, they're going to go to those jobs that are ready, and that are the easy ones to grab off the shelf, that you've got, you know, the environmental and the engineering and all that ready. So that's very important.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, representing a transit authority, we're only indirectly impacted by the state not supplying adequate funding for transportation infrastructure, and that we collect a penny of sales tax, and that's 75% of our revenue. The rest is fares, and then of course some federal money. It's more of an issue when the feds don't come up with new sources of revenue and adequately fund transit that we're impacted. I mean, for me, from my perspective, I think it's you know, what I want to try and do is reduce our dependence on the sales tax, because it's a very volatile source of funding. So we're looking at new ways to generate additional revenue. You know, there may be some areas where we would need authority from the state, and we'll have to explore that when we get to that point. But you know, we're doing things like developing property that we own around a rail stop and using the proceeds from that to provide additional revenue to support more transit. So, you know, the other thing I would say, indirectly we're impacted in that if they aren't building roadways for us to operate our buses on, for instance, or manage lanes where we can operate our buses for free, if they don't provide that infrastructure, that impacts us because we're sitting in congestion the whole time.
And I'll associate my remarks with John's, because VIA obviously is public transit. You don't hear that, but I do believe that we may have gone from being the orphan of transportation policy to being the stepchild, which is still better. And what I mean by that is, since I've been at VIA, and it's only been 6 months, but things have been happening, and that is the relationship between VIA, the Public Transit Authority, and TxDOT. And the chairman, as well as the executive director, being more open and cooperative and actually investing in public transit in San Antonio. My limited knowledge, that's maybe the first time that you've had it at the level that we presently have it. As far as the legislature, again, I think what John is telling you now, it depends what's going on with the main corridors. Are they going to allow us and accommodate us when it comes to a designated or managed lane? That's going to be very important. But public transit is just a totally different entity when it comes to the transportation policy emanating out of the state legislature.
Well, and I wanted to focus on a mode of transportation that is kind of ripe for growth in all of your communities, which is rail. And high-speed rail, I want to start with that first. TxDOT is studying the prospect of high-speed rail in parts of Texas, and then you have a private firm that is seriously looking into building a high-speed rail line from Dallas to Houston. Judge Jenkins, I want to start with you, and then Commissioner Fickes, if you could weigh in. What is your hope for rail in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and kind of what do you see happening next in this?
It's a pretty exciting prospect. Judge Eccles thinks it will be through the environmental process later of next year, and we'll start building in 16 with a thought of completion by 2020 or 2021. What makes this project intriguing and exciting is this is not a project where they're asking for billions of dollars of taxpayer money. This is a project where they believe that with some help on right-of-way, this can be built by the private sector and they're willing to risk their capital and build this. So it's a real win-win opportunity for the region, and we want to do everything that we can to help with that.
Well, I agree, and high-speed rail is something that a number of us in the Metroplex have been working on with Judge Eccles down in Houston for many, many years, and I think it's reached the point where it's a very serious endeavor from their part. They are working on the engineering, the right-of-way, the financing. If you can imagine, from Houston to the Dallas-Fort Worth region in under 90 minutes, then that's what they're looking to do. Hopefully we'll have, if it comes into to Dallas, there'll be what we call I guess a 3-station concept is what our local our Regional Transportation Council is looking at, that will bring it from Dallas to Arlington to Fort Worth, and from Arlington up to the airport. It looks like it's very, very possible. So that's an exciting time. I think that what we're going to need to do is, at least on my side of the Metroplex, we've got to step up and get our rail system in better shape, and get our Tex Rail going to the airport, make improvements on the Trinity Railway Express, as far as creating a line that travels a little bit faster than an hour and offers the type of amenities that people are going to want. I think that 20 years from now, it'll be a totally different environment with the use of rail in the North Texas region. Dallas has done a great job with DART and their DART member cities, and Tarrant County needs to step up. So,
well, now you have this high-speed rail that will potentially go, what we're hearing is downtown Dallas probably, and now you're talking about building or expanding the commuter rail between Dallas and Fort Worth. This is something that's been discussed for years, if not decades, and anytime you try to expand local rail, it often takes a long time. You're debating where do stations go, how many stops, and how many shuttles, and things like that. Meanwhile, this company, because they're private and don't have that process, public process as much, they're hoping to be up and running in maybe 6 or 7 years.
right.
Do you think you can actually have something that meets that station in that time, or is it going to have to probably be a delay?
I would certainly hope so. It's going to be successful. It's going to need to be, you buy a ticket in Houston, you get one seat, and you can get off that train in Fort Worth. Okay, that's the goal. So one ticket to Fort Worth, one ticket to Arlington, one ticket to Dallas, one seat. Not changing trains in Dallas to go to Arlington, Fort Worth, but for that train to continue through. Right now, the current group that's looking at building the high-speed rail, they're looking at going, we think, to Dallas. So it's going to take another initiative, possibly the same group, maybe others, whatever kind of public-private partnership can be put together to create and build that line to fill that gap. So, and it would be great if that could be done in conjunction with them getting their rail line built to Houston, from Houston up to the Metroplex. So it would be seamless. When it all opens, you can go there today. I think what's important, though, is that we need to look at the big picture for high-speed rail in the state of Texas. And not just the Houston to Dallas, but how do we get from the Metroplex down San Antonio, Austin, or Austin, San Antonio, with Temple, Waco, Fort Hood. How do you get from Houston to San Antonio? Do you go direct on I-10? Do you go up, pick up 300,000 people in College Station Bryan at Texas A&M and go over to Austin and then down to San Antonio? So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered. From what, I think the most challenging route's the I-35 route because of the congestion, the number of stops. The Houston to Dallas route, there's really no major city that would require a stop. I mean, there may be cities that want to stop and might eventually get one, but there's no, other than getting past the Woodlands and Conroe, there's really, Huntsville's the largest city, I think, and or Corsicana. So, anyway, go ahead.
If I could, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation to the detriment of our Central Texas leaders, but Gary's got a complexity there that we in Dallas don't have. If you know, for us, it's a very much of a win-win proposition. These people are saying, help us with the right-of-way, and we're going to build this, and we're not asking you for tax dollars. There are several complications that we've got to work through in moving beyond that if public dollars are spent. And you know, you've got the largest airline in America is out of DFW, American Airlines. The fourth largest is in Dallas, Southwest. They also compete, you know, for travel back and forth. So what will their take be if we're talking about a substantial expenditure to supplement, you know, a carrier from Houston to the Metroplex? That's not something we have to deal with this model. Will that come into play as we move forward? Another complexity with multi-stops that I believe we could figure out, but it makes it tough, is it's hard for things to stay high speed as you have several stops. It's hard for that to stay high speed, but everybody's committed to the great opportunity, and this is the first time that we've gotten this far along anywhere in America where there hasn't been a situation where someone's come to the table and said, I need literally billions of dollars to complete this project. So it's a good thing.
Well, and John, Austin has its Cap Metro rail line, which connects, I believe, downtown to some northern areas. What are the plans for the future? I know as a recent Austin resident, I know lots of people in the city would like to see that rail expanded.
Yeah, and then I would just add one thing where I would slightly modify my earlier comment in terms of, you know, the state abdicating its responsibility for funding on transportation infrastructure, and that I think rail is one area where the state is still not where they need to be with respect to helping to move those projects forward. I mean, you heard, the 4 leaders, transportation leaders from the state level, and basically rail came up only at the end and only when you mentioned it. And when you talk to the locals, I mean, rail is a huge thing in the Metroplex. I mean, I think you have more miles of light rail than any other city in the country. And so they're very much in favor of it, but it doesn't really come up in the dialogue at the state level. And, Fund 6 still has to be dedicated to roadways. And I think we need to shift off of that. So I think that's one area where they are lacking. In Austin, we have the Red Line. It runs from Leander about 32 miles outside of downtown to the eastern edge of downtown, and we're only running 4 cars. The capacity is about 3,000 people per day. It's a starter line presently that is a great start. It's packed during peak hour every single day. The plans to expand, but we have to expand it. I mean, that is not a rail system. That's not a meaningful rail system when you're moving it's 3,000 boardings a day. So there's an initiative between the City of Austin, Capital Metro, and the Lone Star Rail. Lone Star Rail is a legislatively formed group to work on rail between Austin and San Antonio that is looking at a regional rail system. So we've moved through a lot of that project, and now they've formed a Northern Corridor group that's looking at how are we going to address high-capacity transit. We're just looking at high-capacity transit, so it's bus rapid transit and rail. There's a group looking at the Northern Corridor, basically kind of the Round Rock area into downtown, and then there's a group looking at what are we going to do about mobility in downtown. I think the most likely prospect is that in November of 2014, the city will put forward a ballot initiative to issue debt to fund the next phase of rail, which would be something that would run between downtown, the state office complex, and the University of Texas, and maybe beyond. So that would be kind of the next phase, but this bigger Project Connect is kind of a regional plan that would be probably 25 years worth of rail, and on the map you can see lines run a lot of different places that hopefully will get built out, and then of course run down to San Antonio, and VIA would be the connector on that end.
Correct.
Thank you for the transition. San Antonio, VIA has been in the news a lot lately. You're kind of at a critical point in the transit district's history right now, aren't you?
It is. You would think that we're on this major project that's going to transform transportation in San Antonio. It really is a streetcar route of about, the whole system is under 6 miles. But one thing that I do want to point out, I'm going to tell you right now, when you mention rail, it is a lightning rod to a certain portion or segment in your community that will oppose it outright, just out of hand. We can get into the political reasons for that because I think elected officials feed that particular beast. But the biggest thing happening when it comes to rail in San Antonio would be the streetcar system, which is not even light rail, but it is an introduction into rail. And there's a history behind that, of course, and there's been tremendous pushback. The other thing is what John is talking about, which holds great promise. If we would just do it, John, and that is the Lone Star Rail Project, which would connect San Antonio and Austin, Texas. It would not be high speed, but it will get you there less time than if you get in that car and get on 35.
Certainly competitive.
It'd be very competitive. I mean, you're still looking at an hour and 15 minutes and such, but there are times when it's going to take you 2 hours to travel 78 miles between the two cities. That is something, its day has come. The way I always think in terms of rail and alternate forms of transportation other than concrete in a car, where we are in Texas on that debate, I always remember how someone characterized the two factions at the time of the demise of the Roman Empire when it comes to transportation. One segment seems to be fighting, and this is the way it was described, and I still love it, fighting for a present that is already past. The other is fighting for a future that is already present. And I think that pretty well describes our transportation policy where we are. And until people understand that it's probably, all transportation is local, but it probably is more regional than anything else, and the partnerships that it's going to require, the funding sources, which is going to be public and private, which will include that horrible word taxes. And you heard everybody this morning to shy away from it. But I don't see how you're ever going to have any all-inclusive, multimodal system without that government contribution, and it is going to be in the form of some sort of a tax.
You know, you mentioned the streetcars kind of being a starter for the city and public transportation, and John, you mentioned what Cap Metro has now, the short rail line is kind of the starter line, and now you're looking to expand it to parts downtown. I wonder if you feel like San Antonio is kind of hoping that what's the interest in rail in Austin will spread, and as they expand more, it'll make it easier for San Antonio to move forward.
You know, we always point to Houston and Dallas, and in 2000, we actually had a vote to raise the sales tax by 1/8 of a cent for light rail. That was the year 2000. It was my second year in Congress, and you know, I was bold and brave then. And I came out in support of it. It was the greatest project ever. We borrowed one of the cars from Dallas. I think, you know, as they say, something was handed to us on election day, and it wasn't very pretty. And it was overwhelmingly defeated because it was about a sales tax increase for a thing called rail, when everybody just basically was saying, I want to drive my car. I want to continue to drive my car. Now, fast forward, look how far behind we are. And we are still meeting that kind of resistance. We will look to Austin, because what they have right now is not similar to what we would be doing. You know, you're 30 miles, you own the rail, and so on. But surely joining Austin on the Lone Star Rail project would be an incredible partnership between the two cities. But like I said, I mean, we've got great examples of where communities have financed light rail on their own because of the same problems that San Antonio has encountered, and since then have been able to have the buy-in by other partners.
And I would just comment real quickly to what Charlie said about the resistance, and there does seem to be some at the outset, but what I'd also say, and I always look to the Metroplex as a matter of fact, that once you put a meaningful system in place, the resistance goes away. Then all they can talk about is how do we fund additional lines. I mean, Dallas has come together and gone to the legislature the last 4 sessions looking for ways to generate additional revenue to expand their system. And I mean, if we put something on the ballot in November 2014, we'll have a chance to see whether or not I'm right, because we'll see if people vote based on the red line, although it's very limited at this point. My sense is that people, once you put it in, all of that, you know, does rail work? Will people ride it? All of that resistance evaporates very quickly, and then it becomes, how do I get my stop?
I'm sorry, did you have something you want to add?
Quick thing about this isn't light rail, not high-speed rail, but just to show you the power of rail, from 2000 to 2010, every Metroplex county grew by more than 10% except for Dallas County. From 2010 to 2012, Dallas County grew faster than any other county in North Texas, both by sheer numbers, I think 46,000, and by percentage. Look at where that growth occurred. It occurred not in the city of Dallas, but in suburbs around Dallas like Garland and Irving and Coppell, some of the southern as well. But in those growth areas, the biggest driver was transit-oriented development around new DART stations. The second biggest driver would be access to linear parks and trails. So that is what is drawing people into our urban core, is transit-oriented development. It is these sort of transportation choices that rail holds huge promise for.
I wanted to pivot to something that was talked about quite a bit in the last panel, toll lanes. John, I want to start with you because today, MOPAC is a toll lane project, the first, well, not the first in the Austin area, but actually, no, the first toll lane project in the Austin area, I believe.
It'll be the first set of managed lanes.
Right,
correct.
managed lanes.
Variable
Starting
tolls.
construction today along MOPAC.
Yep.
And one thing I didn't realize until recently is this is actually going to be kind of big for Cap Metro because
Huge.
buses are going to be allowed to access those lanes, which, as I understand, you're hoping will make the busing system in Austin a lot more attractive.
Well, there's no question it will. I mean, it's actually, and you know, the CTRMA has been a great partner in that respect. No, I mean, truthfully, you know, we'll see what happens in November 2014 with rail, but right now, that is the biggest transit. Those managed lanes are the biggest transit project in Central Texas right now, along MOPAC. Because you can imagine, you know, buses going by, so if it all works as it should, and I'm very confident that it will because it's been tested elsewhere, you know, basically it'll be 50 miles an hour in the managed lanes. The toll rates will vary to keep it at that. The buses are going to be going by. I mean, it's not going to relieve pressure on the main lanes of MOPAC. I mean, they're going to continue to be congested, and what people are going to do is look over and watch the buses going by at 50 miles an hour. I mean, who wouldn't start to contemplate, you know, riding a bus, and nice ones, as opposed to sitting in your automobile, as long as it gets you to where you need to go, and obviously you need a good system to take you to your final destination once you get off the express buses. But no, it's a huge project, and you know, tolling, by the way, I mean, I've never had an issue with tolling. I've actually been an advocate, is that's the only way you're going to pay for those managed lanes. So it has to be tolled. So it's like I said, it's the biggest transit project in Central Texas right now.
Well, and in North Texas, we have several toll lane projects in the works. I believe 3 or 4 major ones, all in different stages of construction or development. First off, I just wanted to ask you both, are you worried that at some point we're going to you know, because these are all openings kind of on top of each other, that there's going to be kind of a little of a toll fatigue from the local residents, that maybe they'll be a little overwhelmed by suddenly we have all these toll lanes that weren't there before?
Well, I hope not. Mm-hmm. But in the North Texas region, pretty much every major thoroughfare eventually will be probably either tolled, and more so managed lane. Mm-hmm. Managed lane, the advantage to that is that gives the drivers a choice. They can make that determination, and as was mentioned earlier by our legislators, in many cases they are one of the bigger projects in my area is the DFW connector, which was at most was 3 lanes each way in the city of Grapevine. It will now be 7 lanes one direction, 6 the other, 3 lanes, plus 2 lanes each way managed. So you've increased free lane capacity from 3 to 6 and 7, plus added the tolling option. The North Tarrant Express, which is about a $4.5 billion project going on right now under construction, kind of the same thing. You'll have that choice. I think what people don't look at, though, is what is the ultimate cost of tolling. If you live in a major metropolitan area, it won't be long before you're spending over $1,000 a year in tolling. If you're, okay? That $1,000, if you took and doubled the gasoline tax in Texas, the state tax, from 20 cents to 40 cents, that would cost the average driver in a metropolitan area $150 a year. So you pay $150 or you pay $1,000. Now, that equation doesn't work for a driver, Amarillo, Lubbock, who doesn't have the congestion that we have. Right. So we're paying the price.
You know, what we're essentially building is a 2-tiered system. A toll system for those who can afford it and want to go fast, and a slow, congested, inadequate system for everybody else. And, you know, there's an old libertarian saw, defend the borders, deliver my mail, build my roads, and stay out of my business. And now you got military contractors like Blackwater defending your borders. You got your post office in danger of being shut down, and the people who are supposed to be building your roads aren't doing it. I'm not proud of the fact that we are going to these toll roads in the frequency that we're going to them, but we don't have a whole lot of choices up here. One of the other things we're looking at doing is we've got these HOV lanes, and we've got some excess capacity in the HOV lanes, and so we're going to sell that to people who want to pay, but we're going to ensure that the speed limit stays at above 50 in the HOV lanes, and that the mechanism, the requirements to drive at no toll cost in those lanes today remain those same requirements in the future. Currently, if you have two people in your car or you're on a motorcycle, you can ride in our HOV lanes. And when we make that switch on those lanes, those HOV managed components, you'll still be able to travel on those without a toll on your motorcycle or your 2+ vehicle.
And although I understand how it's being done in North Texas, which is different from other parts of the state, is that you're going to have to register in advance, I believe, your toll tag and say, I'm going on this lane and I'll have multiple people.
Oh, well, there's actually two types of of things that are frequently referred to as managed lanes. So let's take 2 roads as an example here in Dallas. On 635, we're building true managed lanes. We're using a Centra, Spanish toll company, has come in. They're going to build, I believe, 1 or 2 more free lanes and several managed lanes. And with those, you can register as a high occupancy vehicle and get a discount, which the region, the RTC, would pay for. Mm-hmm. Let's take another road, 30, between Dallas and Fort Worth. That was originally a toll turnpike. We all paid for that with those tolls. Our parents and grandparents did, and some of us did. Now we've got an HOV congestion mitigation lane there. We're going to sell the excess capacity to allow single occupancy drivers to drive on it. They won't, their registration, I forget how they do that. Do they have to register 30 minutes before? Or they just drive on it, the policeman sees them, and we click their toll tag, right? I think we're working that out. Mm-hmm. But the registration piece, the main registration piece is you'll have to register on the true managed lanes like the 635 project 30 minutes before to get your discount, which you're all paying for the discount because the RTC, the regional transportation money, is paying for that discount. And the thing to remember is, and I'm not opposed to our partners, obviously, because we're attracting partners. I'm in the process of trying to attract partners for 183 now. But there's really no question. The reason we wanted the government to build the roads is you can build a road once and you can be done with it, or you can sell a concession for somebody to make money ad infinitum. And it's a better business model for the private sector to make money off of you for 50 years. It's a better deal for you, to manage your infrastructure up front and pay as you go.
Representative Gonzalez, I believe San Antonio is in the minority among large Texas cities. You don't have any toll roads, no toll lanes, nothing definitively in the works. Do you think it's not a question of if, but when at this point for San Antonio?
I love my city. Sometimes we're described as laid back. Unfortunately, sometimes that means you're way back. And we're behind. And the controversy was intense. Now, I was in Congress at the time, and it was kind of nice not to see your name in the front page, but rather local officials catching all the heat. And it was all over proposed tolls. And was reflected by some of the members of the delegation in Austin. But no, it's coming. As a matter of fact, on 281, if people are familiar with 281 coming in from the Stone Oak area, we will have a managed lane. It's a great opportunity for the public transit system because our bus will be able to use it, to utilize it. We're building a rather elaborate park and ride outside of 1604. Again, if you're familiar with San Antonio, you know what that means. So no, that day is coming, but we're just totally way behind But I can see that that will be accelerated in the next couple of years.
In the last panel, the panelists spoke a little bit about the local option, this issue that's come up in the legislature a few times about trying to give local communities the ability to vote in favor of raising some fee or tax to pay for local transportation. I was wondering from all of you, do you feel like your communities want that and are, would be happy to have that, or have the legislature gotten it right that that's just not something that local communities are actually interested in?
Our local business community would certainly prefer that. I think that the voters want the voters are basically getting what they've asked for. They've asked for very limited government, and Lord knows with infrastructure spending what they're getting, and with educational spending is very limited government. When they ask for something different, then they'll get that. From our perspective, though, I think it is, and I think Mike Rollins said this last week on one of these shows, it's continually pushed down to the local level. So we need that flexibility. If we're going to do what the state did in the last generation here locally, then we need the flexibility to be able to fund it. And there's got to be a better way to fund it than if we can fund it through a fee, that's going to be better than for us to fund it through concessions to a third-party partner. I love our third-party partners, but they're in the business of making money, and we're in the business of we're like Vanguard. We're out there for the public good, but private companies, they want to do public good and they want to make money doing that. So if we could have more flexibility, that would be in the second best interest. The best interest would be, as Gary pointed out, everybody, whether you live in the country or the city, you benefit from good roads and good roads into the major areas where the hospitals, the universities, and the shopping is. And if we would just raise or index our gas tax or find some way to deal with this holistically, the cost burden on our citizens would be a lot less, particularly on our urban citizens.
I think in my particular area that I represent, which is northeast Tarrant County, the voters there, after the 2008 legislative session, over a period of time, literally removed a number of state representatives who had supported local option. And most of this was done in a primary election, where you get a very few number of people that are actually voting, but and then we, in later conversations with some of the newer people, they say, well, if we just had a toll road like we used to have, and you could say, why don't we build it and it's going to cost this much and we get it paid for and it goes away, the toll. And my comment was, that's what we call local option. That's it. And you didn't like that 2 years ago, or you ran against that 2 years ago. So, I think in certain parts it might work. I think it's still a hard sell. I think people and legislators are, I think it's the legislature, I don't think is going to step up and do that. Using the rainy day fund today, that's a pretty good deal for them. No pain, no tax increase. They can move forward and get reelected. So that seems to be what's the most important thing. So.
Oh no, just real quick, my own experience has been, I love local control. Give that option to that region or to that city or that county, not necessarily calling for an election, because you have such low turnout now, and we know what that usually means on these specialized type elections or those issues being put on the general ballot. Delegate that to the individuals that have been elected to make those decisions. And that's all I would say. If you're going to do it, don't go over there and say it's all conditioned on having an election. And that sounds so anti-democratic with a little d, but it's not. It's called a representative democracy, and elected officials are elected, as Evan Smith said this morning, to make those tough calls. Maybe it will cost you your office, so be it. But I am going to say one other thing, and that is, if Austin does something and allows a local option to be exercised and decided by the elected officials, for God's sake, don't go and limit the use of the money by excluding a particular mode of transportation, because we do have that. When there is a revenue stream that can be enacted and then you can have the citizens pay it, but you cannot use it for streetcars or light rail or high speed. Don't do that. If you really are interested in local control and allowing the local officials and the citizens to make that decision, then don't limit it. Let them decide. That's, I guess, probably my biggest complaint when we start talking about that particular subject.
And I really don't have anything to add. I agree with all of the comments that have been said completely. I would just say that Austin, very strongly, the business community and beyond, advocated in favor of the local option, and watched it fail for reasons that none of us agreed with. And I agree with the judge in that we're basically getting what we've sort of wished for, or at least some group of the population. So we continue to have more needs than we have funding to implement it, so it needs to come from somewhere.
I want to thank our panel. Please join me in giving them a round of applause.
Thanks, Aman.